What's up, everybody? My name is David Jagno, aka the Jaggernaut, and today I am here to show you something very exciting. That is the Analogue 3D. Not only is this bad boy real, but I've had one for about a week now, and I'm going to be reviewing it for GamesBeat.com. By the time you see this video, it should be live over at GamesBeat.com, my full written review. But I want to give you some impressions and details on the device here on my YouTube channel as well to go along with that article. Now, many of you may know already that Analogue is a company that makes retro hardware with new bells and whistles. So they have the Analogue Pocket, which is a very popular line of Game Boy consoles that play Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo games as well, and now the Analogue 3D. This is the first ground-up recreation, essentially, of the Nintendo 64, which is really one of the most hard systems to emulate. If you are someone that plays a lot of retro games and you may have used emulators in the past, you probably know that a lot of N64 games don't run very well. Much of that is down to the way that the N64 is modeled and the way that it is made and the way that the hardware runs and the way that the game cartridges work. And so this is the first way to authentically play your N64 game cartridges on modern televisions in a way that doesn't feel like crap. So I've been using the Analogue 3D for about a week or so now. I'm not a huge tech nerd guy that knows all the intricacies of how this stuff is made. So if you want a review like that, you probably want to go to Digital Foundry. But I'm going to be talking about the experience as a mostly general consumer who also has a passion and interest in game history and retro gaming. Now, as you can see, I have about 40 N64 games in my collection, including many of the classics like GoldenEye, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Mario 64. I've got tons and tons of games that really take advantage of all the different things that the N64 was known for, including multiplayer, including really, just inventive, original, creative ideas. I feel like the N64, as time has gone on, has kind of lost some of its allure and legacy, because when I was a kid, I was born in 1990, so when I was a kid, the N64 was the console. It was the console that came out in my most formative years as a gamer. I remember playing Ocarina of Time when I was 8 years old, and growing up with those games and in that era was amazing. I came to the N64 as a Genesis kid. I was a Sega Genesis diehard. So going from that to the N64 was pretty tremendous, because it was a completely different set of games, a different library, a different focus, and a very different style of gaming. So it was a very tremendous leap and change for me. And I feel like the N64, even though now as an adult I know it didn't sell very well compared to the PS1, I feel like the N64 was so iconic for the era. And my favorite game of all time was on N64. That's Ocarina of Time. So what I want to do is I just want to talk to you about the N64, why I love it so much, and why I think the Analogue 3D is such a great little console. So as of the time of this video coming out, the Analogue 3D is of course sold out, but they are going to be going for $249 or $250 on their website. And I don't know if I would recommend it wholeheartedly to anyone and everyone. I think it is a relatively niche device that is going to have a very defined subset of people that would get the most out of it. And so let me explain what I mean by that. So the way that the Analogue 3D works is that it essentially takes your N64 game cartridge and plays it the way that an N64 would, like it was original hardware, essentially, even though it's not. And then it outputs that into up to 4K resolution. The reason why this is notable is because a lot of emulators are not doing as good of a job of emulating the actual original hardware. And you can tell the difference. There are things like input latency. The visuals can be glitchy and weird sometimes, especially with textures and lots of clipping. Like I said, textures sometimes don't appear. Frame rate and performance dips a lot in some very polygon-heavy games like Star Fox. And there's a lot of problems with N64 emulation. Now, if you have a great computer, you can probably emulate N64 games perfectly fine. A lot of popular games have been decompiled and ported over to PC, like Ocarina of Time and many other ones. But if you want to play your actual cartridges, if you're like me and you like physical media, I've got over 800 video games in my collection. If you enjoy the tactile, physical aspect of playing a video game, and you want to play the cartridge that you own on the TV you own without having to get a big bulky CRT TV taking up a ton of room, this is the way to do it for N64. There are other methods. I will caveat that. I have a Hyperkin HDMI converter cord for my original N64, and it does a pretty decent job. If you're just looking to play the game and you're not really going to be playing a whole lot of games on the console, you have your original N64, you have cartridges, and you just want to plug it in and be able to play it in a way that isn't terrible, The Hyperkin cable is like 30 bucks and it does a decent job. But if you want to really get the most out of it, if you want to be able to not have a bunch of cords that are, going to all different things on the TV, if you just want to have something you can plug in the wall, plug in the TV on HDMI, have it support up to 4K resolution, have it play natively with the original controllers, cartridges, all that good stuff, this is really the best and only option you're going to have. Now, what I like about the Analogue 3D specifically is that it does a great job of playing your cartridges. I'm just going to be honest, like my original N64, it has a lot of trouble recognizing carts these days. A lot of the time I'll have to put in a cartridge, it doesn't work, take it out, clean it, try it again, doesn't work, blow in the cartridge like we did back in the day, maybe try to reach in and clean the N64, try to reach in and clean the little pen reader connector thingies, and it doesn't work either. Sometimes I'll have to just turn it on and off, unplug it, reset it, and the cart still doesn't work. For a long time, I assumed that my games were faulty. I thought maybe some of my carts just weren't good anymore. Maybe that, they got really dirty or damaged or something. But it turns out it probably was my system, because now with the Analogue 3D, all the games in my collection work flawlessly on first try. I don't have to do anything fancy or annoying to get them to work, which is amazing. They just work right away. And I love the interface of the Analogue 3D. It's very quick and easy and simple. It does support a lot of different controllers. So the controller that it was primarily designed around that you can buy on Amazon is the 8-bit Do 64 controller. And it's amazing. It feels great. The analog stick is very similar to the N64 analog stick. It's got all your C buttons up here, A and B start, all that good stuff. You have 2 Z buttons on the shoulders as well as L and R up there. And it just feels good. It feels like you're holding a Switch Pro controller, but it's for the N64. Feels great, has great weight and heft to it, good vibration, everything works perfectly. It's got Rumble Pack built in, so you have all that functionality. And I really do recommend this controller. If you're going to be playing your Analogue 3D a lot, I think this is probably the best way to do it. However, what I will say is that some games just feel better with the original controller. I think GoldenEye is a great example. Perfect Dark, great example. Turok, those games where it's like a first-person game, for some reason, the weirdness of the N64 controller layout just feels better when you're using an original gamepad. And I think that goes for most games. So I do think that if you are going to be close enough that you can just plug in directly, I would still recommend using the original controllers, especially if you have a Rumble Pack already. I think they do a great job and they still feel really good. Now, this next part that I'm going to talk about could be user error, because for some reason I could not get my Switch N64 controller, the one that they released whenever N64 came to the Switch Online Classics. I have this controller that is supposed to be Bluetooth, and it does work in my past experience, but I can't get it to connect to the Analogue 3D. So maybe it's just an update that needs to happen or something like that. For some reason, it won't connect. Could be user error, like I said. Maybe that's the problem. However, I also do have my Retro Fighters Brawler 64 controller. This one worked perfectly. It has a dongle that plugs into the unit, and it works fantastic. Zero issues, zero problems. So if you have one of these already and you don't want to get an 8-bit Do, this is basically the same layout. It feels very, very, very similar. I don't like the buttons as much. They're kind of squishy on the Retro Fighters. I do love this controller, but the A and B don't feel as responsive. They're a little mushy in my experience. So I do think the 8-bit Do is a better controller if you're deciding between the two, but if you already have one of these, it does work perfectly. So overall, the Analogue 3D is a really great console. I would love to show more footage of different games. If you want to see any game in particular, let me know. Maybe I can make a full video about it or make a short about it. Just showing more gameplay is probably something that I would like to do here on the page, as well as on my shorts and on my general videos. But overall, I think the Analogue 3D is a really cool system. I have been having a lot of fun testing this thing out, trying all my different games in my collection. Everything works great. I would say the one little tiny thing that I don't love about the Analogue 3D, though, physically, in terms of the actual console design, is the power switch. It doesn't stay. It's not a toggle. You push it up and then it releases down. That's a tiny thing, but on the original N64, it was a full toggle up and down. I like the clickiness of it. I know I'm just kind of being silly, but that is something that stood out to me immediately. When you're playing a game on the Analogue 3D, you have a bunch of different options in terms of how you display the image. So, like I said, I'm not a tech whiz, so I'm not going to be able to explain to you the way that the different projection methods work. But what I can say is that between the different methods like BVM and CRT, scanline, clean, scanline's probably my least favorite. I don't like the way that the just straight lines look. It looks very artificial. But if you use BVM or CRT, those methods look crisp and excellent. It looks like a CRT without having to have a bulky CRT in your room. So I've used a lot of emulators over the years, played a lot of games on Project 64, RetroArch, etc. I have a lot of Anbernic devices. I've done a lot of emulation. You know, I'm not opposed to emulation because I think from a preservationist perspective, it's important and good and fine. But authentic original hardware is always my preference, and that is always the best way to play a game. And I think now, finally, after all these years, the N64 feels good, looks good, and plays good on a modern television because of the Analogue 3D. The projection methods that they use for the hardware makes it actually look like a CRT. It's hard to explain. You're not going to be able to really understand it from the footage in this video. You have to see it in person because when you get up close to the screen, it feels like you're looking at a CRT because of the way that the footage is projected onto the screen. It just looks and feels like a CRT, other than, you know, the lack of a curvature, the lack of the staticky fuzz feeling when you get close to the screen. Other than those two things, it really can turn your 4K television into a CRT functionally in the way that it looks and feels. And that is a magical, tremendous thing that they really accomplished here. And I think whenever someone uses it for the first time, they're going to understand what I'm talking about. I think games like Star Fox 64, Mario 64, any racing games or anything that has like a deep draw distance where you can really feel the scaling of, you know, the polygons and pixels as they come and go in distance. It feels so good. It looks so good and crisp and clean. And speaking of clean, there is a clean filter that gets rid of all that. You know, it makes it sharper edges on the polygons and makes it, you know, look more crisp, I guess you could say, but it looks more janky because the N64 was never meant to be seen that way. It was meant to be seen on a CRT television. So those other methods are what actually look and feel better. And that looks and feels like it did back in the day, rather than just a straight HD upscaler that, you know, makes it look terrible like a lot of them do nowadays. The other methods are amazing. So hopefully that answers some of your questions. Hopefully that makes it seem like you understand why the Analogue 3D is so great and why I personally love it myself. So if you have any other questions, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, comments, or if you yourself are getting an Analogue 3D, let me know down in the comments. I plan on making more videos about this thing because it is amazing. So thank you very much for watching.